and just to couch various statements. I'm going to do what I can to discuss points, arguments, and my apologies in advance if it sounds, I guess the term would be ad hominem. I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible. But I think what I'll try to speak on is where one is coming from. So I've had this in my head. I don't know if it's on my chest, but this is another attempt, as usual, to Dumbledore what's in my head and onto your screen, into your ears, hopefully into your mind. I wouldn't be surprised if in one ear, out the other. So, apologies also in case this goes ranty. I think those who have been to my impromptus, thanks, but you might have already observed I can get all over the place. All right. So I'm going to give a little background to start. So months ago, and I forget exactly when now, I know it was one of the streams with Troy Pacelli, retroblasting, and I think Aged Boomer was part of the discussion on the panel. Topic of nerd. I think it was around the central topic of the 80s, and particularly when it came to the word nerd. And I don't know if they put, I don't remember if I go back to the archives, quote unquote. What's a geek? What's a nerd? What's the distinction? And it goes back to my question of stigma. In the sense of when I hear the word nerd, or when you hear the word geek, either term I suppose, what comes to mind? Again, stigma. Everybody's going to have it. And a lot of that is determined by one's exposure to how someone who either self-identifies as a nerd, that's going to create an impression. Okay? For me, particularly when I try to set up a profile, for example, I think I put on my, hey guys, thank you for jumping in. And I'm trying to look at the names here. Oh, I know. Oh well. Thanks for this. Thanks for the sympathy. Howdy. So, I was gonna say I've set up my dating profile headline years ago. I think it's been years. I don't think I've bothered updating it. Maybe I should. I don't know. Don't care. Appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, well, appreciate that. Hello, guys. As I was saying, I couched my profile at the time, and I still have it that way. I think it's Nerd of the Diverse Kind. So let's get right into that. And I might have mentioned it in other impromptus, but I'm of the mindset, and I don't know if it's just my modality when I was growing up. There's a point where I don't cross a boundary. So I'll dip my toes until I decide, no, I'm not going to go that far. Okay, good to know. No, I appreciate that. So I was saying, as far as my venturing, I tend not to make an outright declaration of I'm this, I'm a nerd, or it's just by way of my activity, I am going down the road of being a nerd. Because even in my own mind, the stigma of nerd is guy with glasses, pocket protector, And this is because of all the inundation I've come across during my spoiled Navy brat years of cable TV and the various sitcoms I grew up watching as a kid. So that was firmly planted into my head about what's a nerd. And if you guys remember the game Dweebs, Geeks, and Weirdos, I will probably look for something about the game, maybe not Wikipedia, whatever. But I tend to be a voracious student of whatever. So whatever I can get my hands on, I'll explore a topic. So this has been my modality growing up. Even to this day, I'll dive into a topic. Take your pick. Doesn't matter if it's geopolitics, geography, languages, martial arts. I will exhaust whatever avenues within my means I can exhaust. So if that means I'm a nerd, okay, help me God. All right. And it's very easy, for whatever reason, whether it's psychological, cultural, take your pick, whether I want to be clumped into that profile of being a nerd. Of course, again, going back to the notion of stigma that, oh, I'm going to be profiled as a nerd, I'm going to be seen as a geek, whatever. And I don't know. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. Like when you guys hear the word geek, nerd, what your taking on that is. Based on whatever you might have been exposed to in terms of illustration of what a nerd, geek, whatever, dweeb, whatever, take your pick of terms. I don't know. Do I fit the profile? For those who see my shirt, and I still don't know why cameras are like this, but okay. If they didn't know any better, maybe they do. I don't know how exposed to various sectors of the computing world, like, okay, Slackware. Like, if you delve into Slackware, you'll see our mascot is a penguin sporting a cigar in his mouth. And I think it's called Bob. Cut me some slack. Leave me alone. Kind of thing. So that's the kind of person I am because I just like to soak up knowledge and I'll give credit to my mom. You know, of course, I've mentioned my, you know, the typical Asian American upbringing where you kind of have this tension. You know, it just is. You pull in multiple directions, but I'll give her credit for this. Embrace their thirst for knowledge. So I did what I was advised. So anyway, like I said, I delve into a topic. And so fast forwarding to, I guess you could say today or last night, depending on how I want to tackle this. Uh, the one thing that made me really want to respond is I had been part of, I guess you can say, peanut gallery. I wasn't on the panel, but being a peanut gallery member, quote unquote, participating in the live stream chat about the dark age of television. And I don't know what to think of it in the sense of, well, what era are we talking about? Because depending on how one was inundated with TV, one would say the dark age of TV happened sooner, depending on how one is disposed to TV viewing or anything like that. During the discussion, there was a lot of, how do I describe it? A dismissal or a dismissiveness surrounding sports, team sports. And he's So a comment was made about if you want to support your team, go to the games live. Okay, on one level, okay, there's some truth to that. At the same time, having been to my share of live events, been to my share of games, uh, depending on the sport, no. And this is something that I'll try to circle back with respect to broadcast TV. Okay? Again, sorry if I'm going all over the place. But there are things we have to decide on. It's going to be purely dollars and cents and time. And as I learned in the .com I worked at, sometimes you get it in conversation. Time is money. So, in the sense, okay, yeah, if I had the money, if I had the time, if I had the space, sure, I'll go to a live event. Having gone to my share, it's a different experience than watching things on TV. So I'm going to try to bring this back in the realm of pro sports. But their commentary on pro football or the NFL, and I have my opinions about the production quality of NFL football or just the experiencing of the game on TV. But I think it goes deeper into the realm of how I perceive their dismissiveness about the NFL, or I would say team, he calls it sports ball. Okay. I try to look at things in their totality. Whether I knew that deliberately, my experience with the literature I've come in contact with surrounding my martial arts background of researching Jeet Kune Do, or Bruce Lee's martial art of Jeet Kune Do, for as long as I did, until I started training it. I researched that puppy for 10 years. And all the literature was there is no effective segment of totality, meaning you can't look at things in isolation. So going back to my nerdiness, my nerdy modalities of looking into a topic and being exposed. I don't know if I call it sensory overload, but that's what ended up happening. And for whatever reason, and I grew up playing basketball. That was one of the first sports I grew to appreciate. I also played my share of softball, baseball. I played volleyball. But something about team sports, this idea of team, and this is why I look up to folks in the military, whether current, former, future, in that there's something about teamwork. And particularly with pro football, as I grew to love it, there were aspects of pro football I grew to appreciate. And I think I chimed in the comments. I don't know, I don't remember if it ever got addressed. That I would rather watch my violent chess on grass. I think I just called it violent chess. 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 I'd rather watch that than whatever they peddle as science fiction. And so, me being my nerding out is such that I can get obsessive about it. So, meaning, from a standpoint of analyzing the game. But more than that, and I'm learning as I'm going through my studies that I'm only looking at a segment of the overall totality, going back to my JKD exposure. And I may not have been in tune with that as I ventured into my attempts at a PC repair assembly configuration venture, where I talk with customers or people I've been asked to diagnose, build computers for them, and they would always ask me, blah blah blah. What do I recommend as a computer build? Well, the question is, as I mentioned in other videos on my channel, what's your end state? What do you need it to do? What are your modalities on the computer? In the realm of today, okay, what do you need your phone to do? What do you need your tablet to do? What are you looking in your network? What do you need it to do? And so going back to pro football and team sports in general, I don't know if I was triggered, but I would definitely wanted to respond in this manner. I don't know why, but I just felt compelled to do something here where I would explain why there is a time and place for me to say, or anybody for that matter, to say, homie, stay in your lane. If you have no interest in pro sports, team sports, that's on you. Your dismissiveness, well, I mean, there's a reason why I don't tune into all of your streams, but I'll still be a supporter. Because are there things I'm interested in? I'll say, sure. But are there things that I think you're a little misguided on? Sure. And again, it's only about the arguments. So team sports is very important. It's helped me as a person. And for those who don't appreciate the athletic endeavor, I'm sorry, that's on you. Because apparently something about the team sports culture, and I'm with you on certain levels regarding team sports. Is there a certain subset of team sports that can be a little toxic? Not surprised. That's part of why I didn't join the wrestling team. I like the grind, I like the skill. I respected the skill of wrestlers, but I couldn't see myself in that deep into the culture. So going back to my nerding out on pro football, and again, my spoiled Navy brat upbringing, I nerded out on pro football. From and I think my video game upbringing, thanks to Madden of all things, but I think a lot of these simulation games, it does inspire a certain degree of creativity, however, wherever, whenever you want to take it. And that's another thing I noticed with this channel in question is why pontificate on something you know nothing about, particularly when it comes to modern games, modern hardware. I'm not completely up to date, but at least catch up. And so, again, going back to staying in your lane, if you have no interest in modern games, for example, or team sports, don't say anything about it. As someone who's nerded out on pro football, and I'll say something about the presentation, hopefully sooner than later within this impromptu stream. But when I was exposed to football the way I was, video games, ESPN was a different animal back in the day, especially when they really partnered with NFL Films. And so it it goes into the point of presentation, and hopefully I can lead into that discussion of where we are today with engaging the venture of pro football. So, like I said, Madden, simulation games, on the computer or the Super Nintendo. I think that's where I started, and all the other machines I owned at the time. And it sparked something within me. And again, a segment of totality. I'm looking at what I can grasp within the greater pro football tradition. I mean, okay, I'm going to stay out of my lane with respect to college football because it's not my jam. I think, particularly when it comes to watching the pipeline of players, just because you were good in college, and this is all I'll say about that, just because you were good in college doesn't translate that you'll be good in the NFL. That is all I'll say. So going back to pro football, I read as much as what I can get my hands on. So whether that was reading up on players, reading up on coaches actually, soaking up whatever I could because at the time in the mid 90s, late 90s, information was at a premium. I love social media to an extent. I don't know if it's high or low. I think it's more on the low. But information came at a premium. You didn't have DVR back in the late 90s even. That you can get what you got and you appreciated it. Whether that was an interview of players or coaches. So the thing with NFL Films, for those who may remember, John Vicenda, and I think it was Harry. I think it starts with a K. Callis, forget the guy, but it just inspired me to nerd out even more because of the quality of the presentation. Like they were mini half-hour documentaries on the daily. And this is why I grew to love the dynamics of pro football because of how it engaged me and I think in some respects a lot of other people. It it sparked careers. I would like to think it inspired people to look into that. And so going back to this discussion on the dark ages of television, I don't know. Broadcast quality isn't what it used to be. I would say compared, and I tried watching NBA basketball, and I'm sorry, I don't care if the commentator or analyst is a man, woman, or child, but if you can't bring the zing, you're not bringing me into the game. So that aside, I'll probably talk about it later into this discussion. But going back to my nerding out of pro football, I remember going to the library, the public library of all places. Well, I don't know about of all places, but I was able to get my hands on various literature. You know, I even went into some of the kids section in the library and they talked about the rules of football, which was cool. I learned more about football. But as I got older, I started getting books. And I think one of the most striking books I got was a collection of either interviews or thought pieces, opinion pieces, or interviews of a variety of NFL coaches, their philosophies. But the most influential, being a Niner fan, and I'll admit there was a period of time where I went between Niners and Cowboys. That I'll finally admit. Okay, but as I learned more about the Niner history, at least within the era I grew up, I started appreciating the they call it the 49er tradition. I'll call it that. But they always talk about dynasties. Of course, of those who may be born within the late 90s up to early 2000s, the Patriot dynasty or the Patriot way. Same deal with the Niners of the 80s and to some extent Cowboys of the 90s. And I might want to throw the Buffalo Bills of the early 90s into that mix because, hey, going to four straight Super Bowls, that's tough. But reading literature about former players, the psychology involved in team sports, where the locker room is probably the most diverse. And I know there have been a lot of plights within the 60s, particularly with segregation and all that jazz. I get it. But nowadays, it's not uncommon to find a fairly diverse locker room, whether we're talking about the skin pigment, creeds, whatever. They all got together towards a goal. And the thing fascinating to me as I navigate even my own education during this career transition is I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, as one current 49er player, George Kittle, acknowledged when he looks at it all. I stand on the shoulder of giants, or on the shoulder of legends. I forgot his exact quote. But learning about the greater football tradition, or in my little subset, the 49er tradition, Bill Walsh, reading up on his, and I think I might have brought up, I actually got a copy of his, what you would term, Bible of pro football. Because there is a lot of nerddom in that modality. How to run an organization. And by golly, talk about a Bible on business organization. Can't complain. I remember reading that book at the library back, I don't know if it was during high school or when I got out of college. I forgot when I finally got in contact with that book. And by golly, talk about attention to detail. You know, the one thing I appreciated during those ESPN days with Chris Myers, I think the interview series was called Up Close. And whether that was pro basketball or pro football, but they all echo similar mantras, similar mindsets. And that's, and it's like, I guess what I was looking for, I don't know, I'm just spitballing right now, that what does it take to run a successful team, organization, leader? How do you be a good leader? How do you lead men of diverse backgrounds, mentalities, yada yada? How do you get them to unite towards a single direction? In the case of pro football, winning a Super Bowl, NBA, you know the jazz. You know, how do you get these personalities together? How do you let them overlook any differences? And that's the fascinating part. And I still nerd out on these things. I don't know if I showed them or I talked about them, but I did recently pick up some newer books on the 49ers. I'm just going to shoot off the top of my head. Three titles coming to mind. One, I think they're all from respected journalists I came in contact with. That was the other thing, too, with the early days of the interwebs. Talking about information being a premium at the time. And the internet wasn't what we have now. And in some ways, I miss it because you did what you could to find it. And this was before the days of Google, before it blew up into what it became. You know, I was using all sorts of search engines. And I'm going to just name a few. And maybe this is going to, I suppose it's going to accurately date me. Maybe not. So Lycos, Metacrawler, Ask Jeeves was one. Yahoo, of course. AOL, when my mom was still on AOL, we tried to get her to stop that. Took us a while, but we eventually got her off the AOL. So anyway, so reading all these news articles. And then came the blogosphere. I'm a little ambivalent towards the blogosphere. I mean, information's pretty much at your fingertips nowadays, and especially with the proliferation of Substack nowadays. And I'll admit, I do subscribe to a couple of Substacks. So the other dimension to my nerding out on football is strategy, and and particularly when I listen to former players. My favorite former player to listen to, Mark Schlereth, talks about it, tells it like it is, calls a spade, and he comes at it from an offensive lineman's perspective. And I respect all positions within pro football or football in general. Something about the athletic venture, like I said, really tests you. And so, going back to this idea of staying within one's lane, I'm not a Dungeon and Dragons guy. I have been to like one gathering, and I'll be honest, not my jam. Just like cosplay, not my jam. But you do you. If cosplay is what brings you joy, as I'll say it, you Marie Kondo that shit. if you want to, if you want to do that, you do you. More power to you. I'm I'm just glad there are venues for within a given event. So, like I said, I went to the Retro Gaming Expo, and I did mention there are various sections within that where you can do a costume contest, cosplay contest. Great. I respect cosplayers, just not my jam. I just know from the outside looking in that requires its own nerding out. And I can think about the various things you think about when you nerd out on cosplay. Where you gotta look at the material, the time invested, the creativity. And that's the thing. When we nerd out on any given thing, whatever juices may flow, they flow. So whether that's my nerding out on computing technology, even though, yes, there are gaps, but I don't think the gaps are a detriment to my overall computing knowledge. I think given the background I have in computing, which I'll admit, it's fairly technician level, and that's fine. But I was very fortunate during those early years in the 2000s. I got in contact via forums where I got to talk to early developers, whether we're talking website designers, web programmers, or computer scientists or operating system guys. They explained to me it's not just about the hardware. Yes, the hardware, sometimes they'll give it to me straight up. They're like, yeah, if you want better performance, get better hardware. There's no amount of tweaking the operating system that will give you a bajillion gigawatts of speed and performance. So it's just one of those things that got me thinking. And so going back to pro football, like I appreciated whatever degree of totality I could get because I nerded out on it. And it goes back to this notion of what's a nerd. And if we were honest with ourselves, we still have the stigma of a guy with a whatever you want, fill in the blank kind of glasses with a pocket protector. They wouldn't suspect a guy who wears a backwards cap, outside of those who may know the Slackware shirt, and if for those who may see, who has a Zero Foxtrot banner on his wall, and you see that little samurai there underneath it, and you see the cross. Okay, I am somehow inundated with a tradition of traditions that I'm very fortunate to have come in contact with. That makes me, if that makes me a nerd, okay, guilty as charged. And it's not something that, and I do find it fascinating. I do find it fascinating that nerding out has become an accepted term. You wouldn't have thought it 30, 40 years ago, maybe. I don't know. But I don't know if nerds will ever be as accepted. Although I have to give Retro Blasting credit because he mentioned his view of a nerd having skills that lend him a job. Welcome back. Welcome back. But the funny thing about being a nerd is, do I need to live up to a profile? I don't know. Like I don't know if I'll ever dress like my age. I'm getting close to my mid 40s come June next year. Geez, 2025 is almost closing, but I will be 45 in June. And so I don't know if I'll ever dress age appropriately, whatever that means. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. I'll still rock a backwards cap, or I'll rock whatever cap I've got. And I don't know. Do I need to act my age, dress my age? You know, they always talk about nowadays. I don't know when they started talking about. Yep, that is right. That is correct. Birthday month is in June. But I don't know. I don't know when you guys came in contact with the phrase, this is the new blank. So, for example, 30 is the new 20, 40 is the new 30, 50 is the new 40. I don't know. And the people I've come in contact with in the martial arts world, and I think I might have brought it up in lives or in other videos, that the guy I started going to for classes, and I chased around uh, California, and I actually went to Alabama last year, and I went to his workshop just this past weekend. He's in his 50s and doesn't dress, I guess. I don't know. We don't know what that is like, dress your age. So, going back to the dark ages of television, and I was surprised during that presentation. I personally thought the dark ages of TV happened in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, particularly with the whole proliferation of reality TV. I don't know, maybe my snarky side, my more pessimistic side said, as soon as MTV stopped airing music videos, so their ratio might have been 80% music videos and 20% shows. Beavis and Butthead to name an example in another Daria. And then I forget if it was MTV that aired My So-Called Life, or that was Nickelodeon, I forget. But basically, my view of Dark Age of television is much earlier than what they presented last night. Whereas, because they were showing a lot of these, because I haven't watched network television outside of local stuff. That's my only reason to care about local or network TV, is I get the local bits of my neighborhood. Uh, So, especially with American Idol still doing its thing, America's Got Talent, I'm over all these talent shows because that's great. Um, put an album out, and it's funny. Because even though you may win American Idol, for example, there's no, you might be outdone by the runner-up, believe it or not, because it's not. Okay, great, you won the contest. That's just one sign of one thing. You won the contest. Cute. That's cute. Let me know when your album comes out so I can either pick it apart, or say, oh, that's a darn good album. Yeah, I'll listen to you. You know, it's what you do with what you've been given. And so, nerding out on the dark age of television, my thinking is, at least the way I look at it from the standpoint of a sports spectator, going back to the point made about go to the stadium and support your team, dollars and cents, okay? Plus, traversing to a stadium, that takes time. I wasn't see what you're trying to say there. I think you said so, and it looks like an FR on my phone. Uh, so going back to this idea of going, well, if you want to support your team, go to the stadium. I'm not in a financial position to. Sometimes that's mitigated because outside of dollars and cents, I've been to my share of games in the last 10 years. Uh, the experience, it all comes down to the staffing. Okay, staffing in the stadium, whether we're talking about the concessions, ushers if they have them, the I don't know what you call them, but they're the ones getting people riled up during the game, particularly when they timeout breaks. I remember going to a Blazers game at the I'll call it the Rose Garden. I refuse to call it what it is now, but having gone to the Rose Garden a few times, and there are times where I do appreciate being in that environment. I've been to my share of Padre games. Shout out to my mom's friend Michelle. Thank you for the hookups back in the day. Um, Outside of that, I can't gain the appreciation of the chess match at times. And that's where good commentary, good broadcasting takes its place. That's why you have good broadcasters. And if there's one thing I'll comment on, it's this weird trend. And for whatever reason, ESPN, outside of Monday Night Football, has this trend of very dry, and I'll say it. And I know other commentators have pointed out, but they had to circle back because of their partnership with the league. But these analysts, a lot of these, you have the play-by-play guy. That's one level of engagement. But the analysts, they're few in between. So I'll name names. And again, I mentioned earlier in the stream, doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, or child. And I'll give some examples. So ESPN, whatever you want to call it, they let Jeff Van Gundy go. They let other people go in the basketball broadcast. And I'm sorry, Doris Burke puts me to sleep. Just like Kirk Herbstreit puts me to sleep. And I'm trying to remember what I saw in another broadcast. They just put me to sleep. And for whatever reason, ESPN did not touch the Troy Aikman. Why am I blanking on the guy's name? Come on, his partner. Joe Buck. You know, it there is little enthusiasm I get nowadays. For whatever reason, they like. I remember in the mid late '90s, especially when Jordan was in his heyday. And if you guys remember the personality Marv Albert, and I'll say even the late Bill Russell. You know, you got the play-by-play guy, that's one dimension. Then you got the analysts. Some analysts provide real color, like John Madden. John Madden made it fun to know the ins and outs, the X's and the O's. You don't have that anymore. Like, I don't remember them doing any kind of chalk talk during games. And that's sad. And even though basketball may not be my jam, there was a period of time where I liked watching the Warriors. Part of that was me listening to the Bay Area sports radio and being attentive to the Warriors' situation, especially when people were wondering if Steph Curry was going to ever play again. But like if I were to name names, like I said, it didn't matter if you're a man, woman, or child. Like the Miller siblings, Reggie and Cheryl, provided a degree of enthusiasm that I don't think Doris Burke could have delivered. That's why I snooze. You know, like all these former players that provide analysis, the right ones can deliver that pizzazz. And the reason why people still enjoy watching Troy Aikman do his thing with Joe Buck is he does provide a little bit of spice in his commentary. So going back to Marv Albert, I just came up with this term before I started doing this stream. I just remember, of course, you got the analysts, but sometimes the play-by-play guys like Kevin Harlan, for example, whether we're talking basketball or football, he just knows how to inject life into a broadcast. That's why I tend to listen to Westwood One because that's what he's on. And I think he does some stuff for networks like CBS. I don't remember Fox. I could be wrong. But Marv Albert, going back to his example, whenever Michael Jordan would do his thing, Marv Albert would go, Jordan at the free throw line, or Jordan doing this, Jordan for three, yes. He, it's like I'd rather listen to the guy who did the NBA Jam voice nowadays because there's little to no enthusiasm injected within a broadcast. Okay, so on that level, like baseball, like I appreciate the craft of baseball, but watching baseball, snoozer. Same thing with golf, snoozer. Sorry, I don't know if it's the dynamic of the sport itself, but there's no there's no reason. Like even when I watch horse racing on TV, there's a little bit of excitement. But it's different when you go there live. So that person has a point about going to the live venue. But going back to that rigmarole of the experience of going to a stadium or arena, you have to contend with traffic. That is probably, I remember going back home from Padre games, getting out of the stadium was a chore. So that's another reason why I prefer, for the most part, watching things on TV. So I'm sorry. As much as I would like to go to the games, tickets are at a premium. And if I do pay whatever ticket price that is for a game, I'm likely to go into the bleachers section, and I got to bring a monocular or binoculars. I still have that monocular, pretty cool. But I I'm sorry, but again, stay in your lane. And I'll probably toss this out there in terms of nerding out. Okay, again, what is a nerd? I nerd about multiple dynamics at play. And so one of the things I get a little is about dismissiveness about education. Even I ruffle things with my mom about this. You know, I only contend my lack of employment during my teenage years set me back in terms of work experience where I can give businesses a reason to take a shot on me. Of course, they're going to roll the dice on the person who has more work experience than someone who doesn't. If anything, one thing that we have lost as a society is entrepreneurship. You know, kids in their lemonade stands. That can develop and grow into something fruitful. At least I like to think so. But because of child labor laws, we don't exactly cultivate that anymore. And going back to this notion of education, who's to determine what what education is useful? Okay, on one level, okay, if I were to roll the dice on degree X or versus degree Y, I'll probably pick roll the dice on degree Y if degree X is something that will not give me a reason to pull the lever on you as being an employee in my organization. Like, what tells me that you will translate your skill into whatever job I'm asking you to do? Okay, on one level, that's true. And at the same time, what can you give me? The other part is the burden of proof is on the applicant. Can they, again, going back to my point about teachers being poor pitchmen and poor pitch women, students are the same thing, but because they haven't been taught about that. They haven't been taught to sell themselves. Maybe network here, network there with different people. But if they cannot figure out how to make their education useful, that's on them. That is totally on them. But at the same time, you can't dismiss someone who has a degree in X. If they find a way to make it useful and they can show they can learn, more power to them. Just like the wild west of the interwebs we have today, we have a lot of avenues where we can self learn. Now, that's going to be in the eye of the beholder, to be honest, that I have to show why. I have to explain why. Roll the dice on me and not the person who's applying alongside me. Do they see the potential in what I have to offer? Great. If so, if not, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board and figure out how can I couch my positioning? How can I position my stature, my degree of education? What can I lend to the table? And so I have to be able to do that in a genuine fashion, authentic fashion. And then again, I just thought about it before I went live. I thought about this idea about team sports being the most mutually human resources evaluation, because the players can fire the coach, quote unquote, and the coach can fire the players or the GM, whatever structure you have on a team. This is where team sports is where you it's one of the few dynamics where you have a mutual hiring and firing process, because players will sniff out inauthenticity or a lack of authenticity in a coach. They can say, I'm not going to play for you. The message has gone sour. So in other words, the players can fire the coach or the coach can fire the players. It's one of those mutual hiring and firing experiences you only get in team sports dynamics. Okay, so before they dismiss sports ball, got to know a little bit of thing or two about beyond just watching the game. Does it? It's like, again, going back to useful knowledge. That's cute. You're a cleric of fill in the blank. But I don't. I mean, or the fact that you can speak Klingon. Is that applicable to any job? If you can couch your positioning, great. If you can spin it in a way that would say, yeah, you're adventurous in learning that. That takes time. Cool, I'll roll the dice on you. Versus, okay, if I got a guy who knows Klingon versus a guy who may know fill in the blank foreign language, I'm going to take the roll of the dice on the guy who's studying actual foreign language, not Klingon. Or someone who may be a quote Klingon cleric versus someone who is an actual minor cleric. I'm probably more legit. but I don't lord that over anybody. It's just that's part of my personal profile. Do I make it all about the fact I'm a cleric? No. No. Because it's so easy to be wrapped up in segments, so easy to be wrapped up in a specific segment of a totality. Like the totality of me, though there are moments where I have to float between what takes primacy over the next. Because, yeah, on one level, I'm a martial artist. At the same time, I'm a minor cleric. I have a role. I've had many roles. I'm an aspiring, what you might call a aspiring medical practitioner of some sort, whether nutrition, naturopathic modalities, etc. But I have to find a way to make those aspects useful. And I have to be able to express that genuinely, authentically as to who I am and not to put a false front. That's a struggle for anybody. So that's where I'm at when it comes to being a nerd. Whether we're talking liturgics, spirituality, philosophy, wrestling with the various traditions within my own subset of a tradition. So I will stay out of my lane. I don't know jack about Dungeons and Dragons outside of that one experience with my homeboys or my homeboy who, you know, I'm not going to pontificate about Dungeons and Dragons. That's not my jam. Tabletop games, not my jam. You know, I'm not going to say much about it. And same thing about the other thing too is they were pontificating on shows they have no care for. Like, okay, that's great. But to me, the dark age of TV happened decades ago. And this is coming from a spoiled Navy brat who I joke about myself being a couch potato growing up. And there was a point in my life I was a cage potato with all the UFC I used to consume. But, you know, all the scuttlebutt, you have to be able to dip your toes, and that's what a nerd is to me, to kind of put a bow on the discussion. If you're not willing to dip your toe into those waters, don't pontificate on those. If you have no interest in sports ball beyond just what's on TV or what's in the stadium, don't dismiss it. Don't dismiss it. I may not dip my toe completely into the subculture of certain sports. Like I said, wrestling. I'm not into the whole weight cutting, weight gaining. I just want to know the skill and the tradition. Like my favorite tidbit I got from one of my instructors, one of our presidents was a catch wrestler. So that stuff. You know, there's a lot within a subsection of a certain aspect of our culture. Sports. You know, we always look at the history of fill in the blank. You know, like basketball, there is a degree of strategy. Is there something I appreciate about the art of one-on-one basketball? Yeah, I used to play one-on-one. But it's even more fascinating when you see it within a team dynamic. And so that part of nerding out is very important to me. The physics behind swinging a bat, the physics behind a good pitch, that is a nerding out of sorts. So just because it doesn't resonate with your subculture, you can't dismiss it outright. Especially if you come off as someone who doesn't care about the topic or may not know. Like, are there shows listed there that I care about after the lineup they showed? No, because I I've kind of walked away from network TV again, just watching it for the local news. There isn't much that I care for nowadays in terms of a lot of TV. And at the same time, my interests are so diverse, I don't get angry for that long. I may be angry about that, but it should only last for a short time, and that's why I tune out on a lot of channels. In the sense, like, man, life is too short to stay angry. It's okay to be angry, but to stay angry, what, life is too short. Why stay angry? I just move on to the next. And this is one of the reasons why I appreciate guys like that fat samurai guy. Because I don't think he is so knee deep into the so called culture war. And I'm not about the culture war. I don't think I ever was. Are there things I may point out? Here and there, maybe. But there's a reason why we want to entertain ourselves. And that's the other thing why I love pro football. It's still entertaining. I'll probably, if I get tired of the over legislation of football, which has been a trend, I'll probably go to rugby. It's got more action, just like my grandmother used to say whenever I watched Law and Order with her. She would go, action. And going back to that fat samurai guy, the one thing I appreciate, he brings on people that talk about the movie, not their politics, not their fill in the blank. They discuss the craft. And that is the number one thing I appreciate about that fat samurai guy. And depending on what my modality is of entertainment, are there guys that may lose my patronage? More than likely. Plus, with my financial situation, I can't support everybody. I will come at it from a standpoint of keep me informed, keep me infotained, and allow me to escape. And even though I did watch a movie last night after watching a short of an interview with that fat samurai guy, I'll probably do another impromptu later today or whenever I decide to do it. But let's just say Gladiator Underground, it could have been a better popcorn movie. That's my quick review. And there were various things that I felt out of place. And let's just say it was Bloodsport meets The Running Man, if you remember that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And no, I don't think I'll venture to watch the new Running Man. I think it has Glenn Powell's the guy. And if there is one little kicking myself moment, it was just earlier in the middle of the week. There was a kung fu movie showing at my local hole in the wall. Oops, missed out. Talk about FOMO. Well, I often say FOMO is dead to me. All right, I think I've gone long enough. Look out for another impromptu, depending on, I guess you can say how triggered I am. I don't know. I don't know if I was triggered, but I guess you can say I was more than compelled to respond to what I encountered yesterday with a live stream. So it's just one of those things that, you know, I guess my expectations were such that I thought they were going to go into a different time period. I didn't think they would go into today because to me, dark age, like I've been saying, the dark ages of TV happened decades ago. Thanks to reality TV. Because how many more times do I need to see a winner of American Idol? Very formulaic. And sometimes, that economic principle you learn in Economics 101 or whatever primary economics class, macro, law of diminishing returns. And I don't know how they get away with it, but American Idol, America's Got Talent, it's good for like the first season. And the same thing with shows like Hell's Kitchen. They have the same formula. At least with a show like Organized Crime, yeah, they got its formula. It's got its formula, but I think it's a different show than SVU, which I tried watching the rebooted Law and Order. It's all right, but I've been meaning to put this out there, guys. If you want, chime into the comments about my sharing Solvable. I purchased Solvable with Shia LaBeouf. I don't know if it's like along the veins of Million Dollar Baby, but based on that Fat Samurai guy's interview about the movie or the foray into the movie, that's what I think it's going to come across as a Million Dollar Baby-esque kind of film. And if I find it, or I should say, if I dig it up within my library at my folks, it's probably still in my bedroom, quote unquote bedroom. It's part of my dad's man cave now. But SPL, it still has its tugs. Okay, guys, I think I've gone long enough, ranty as usual. So peace out, and I'll catch you on the other side.